stop. Before you scroll past this, the Supreme Court just made a massive ruling that affects every single thing you buy. Every grocery run, every Amazon order, every tank of gas, and the politicians celebrating right now, some of them used to support the very thing they're cheering about killing. I'm going to break it all down, the ruling, the hypocrisy, and what it actually means for your wallet. But first, if you want the truth behind the headlines, no spin, no agenda, hit that subscribe button right now and ring the bell so you never miss a video like this. Go ahead, I'll wait. Good, now let's get into it, because this story, it is wild. On February 20th, 2026, that's today, literally today, the United States Supreme Court dropped a bombshell ruling that sent shockwaves through Washington, Wall Street, and every business that imports goods from overseas. In a 6-3 decision, the Supreme Court ruled that President Donald Trump did not have the legal authority to impose sweeping global tariffs using the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, or IEEPA. Let me say that again, because it matters. 6 justices said the law Trump used simply does not give the president the power to levy tariffs. Period. Now, what is the IEEPA? Great question. It's a law that gives presidents certain powers to deal with, quote, unusual and extraordinary threats from foreign nations. Presidents have used it before. Reagan used it, Clinton used it, Obama used it. The law lets the president regulate transactions with foreign entities during a declared emergency. But here's the problem, and this is where the court drew the line. The word regulate does not mean tax. The word regulate does not mean impose tariffs. The majority said, and this is important, that imposing tariffs requires explicit congressional authorization, and Congress never explicitly gave the president that power under IEEPA. Host. Think of it this way. If your lease says your landlord can manage the property, that does not mean they can charge you a random new fee without your agreement. The court said Trump essentially added a fee, a massive economy-wide fee, using a law that was never designed to do that. Now, Trump and his team argued that these tariffs were critical to national security, that the power to regulate commerce with foreign nations combined with emergency powers gave him the authority to act. The 3 dissenters on the court apparently agreed, but the majority, they weren't buying it. And let's be clear about what these tariffs actually were. This wasn't a small tweak. Trump had imposed sweeping tariffs on goods coming in from virtually everywhere. His so-called Liberation Day tariffs from April 2025, plus country-specific duties on China, Canada, Mexico, the EU, and others. These were tariffs that affected trillions of dollars in trade. According to the U.S. Treasury, in January of 2026 alone, these tariffs brought in $30.4 billion. Over the prior fiscal year, $124 billion in revenue. That's real money. That's not pocket change. But here's the thing about that revenue. Somebody paid it, and it wasn't foreign governments. It was American importers, and ultimately American consumers. You, me, your family at the grocery store. Within minutes, and I mean minutes, of this ruling dropping, Democrats were flooding social media and sending out press releases faster than a tweet goes viral. Let's run through some of the biggest reactions, and then we're going to talk about why some of these are, let's say, complicated. House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries called it, and I'm reading this directly, a big victory for the American people and another crushing defeat for the wannabe king. The wannabe king. Strong words, not exactly subtle. Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer went to X, formerly Twitter, and posted, Trump's illegal tariff tax just collapsed. He tried to govern by decree and stuck families with the bill. Enough chaos. End the trade war. Okay, let's pause on govern by decree, because that framing matters. What Democrats are arguing, and what the court essentially agreed with, is that the Constitution gives Congress the power of the purse and the power to tax. Tariffs are taxes. The president doesn't get to unilaterally impose taxes. That's the argument. And constitutionally, it's a strong one. Rapporteur Pramila Jayapal perhaps said it most clearly. Only Congress has the power to impose taxes, which includes Trump's reckless tariffs. Now, politically progressive Jayapal and constitutionally conservative originalists are agreeing on something. That tells you something about where the legal consensus landed. Representative Brendan Boyle, top Democrat on the Budget Committee, framed tariffs as what amounted to a national sales tax on hardworking Americans. And Representative Don Beyer, chairman of a trade task force, said Trump's tariffs were imposed without credible reason or cause, crushing consumers and small businesses to, quote, help pay for giveaways to his wealthy friends. That last part is a partisan punch, but the underlying legal argument, the court agreed with it. Okay, here's where it gets juicy, because some of you are sitting there thinking, wait a second, didn't Democrats used to support tariffs, didn't they? Let's find out. Let's start with Nancy Pelosi. Former Speaker of the House, one of the most powerful Democrats in modern history. On the House floor, Pelosi once made the case for using tariffs as leverage against China. She pointed out the trade imbalance. The U.S. charged China about a 2% most favored nation tariff on Chinese goods coming into America, while China slapped a 35% tariff on American goods going into China. And Pelosi's point, that's not fair. Use tariffs to push back. Now, to be fair to Pelosi, she was urging Congress to act. She wasn't endorsing a president going around Congress to impose tariffs by executive decree. That distinction matters legally. But politically, it's a nuanced point that her Republican critics are not going to let slide. And frankly, they shouldn't have to. And then there's Joe Biden. Here's something you might not know or might have forgotten. When Biden entered the White House in 2021, he did not remove Trump's first-term China tariffs. He kept them, largely intact. Democrats controlled the House and the Senate at the time. They had the votes to push back. They didn't. Biden's team even expanded some of those tariffs in 2024, hiking duties on Chinese EVs, solar panels, steel, and semiconductors. So the Democratic argument isn't tariffs bad. It never was purely that. The Democratic argument is more specifically tariffs imposed unilaterally by a president using emergency powers without congressional authorization bad. That's the distinction they're drawing. And look, legally, it's the right distinction. Constitutionally, Congress does have primacy over tariff policy. That's right there in Article 1, Section 8. But politically, the optics of cheering the death of tariffs when your own party kept them in place for 4 years, that's a conversation. At least one House Republican had a sharp response. An unnamed GOP lawmaker pointed out the irony of Democrats celebrating foreigners not being taxed while simultaneously opposing tax cuts for Americans. Specifically the tip exemptions, overtime exemptions, and Social Security tax relief in the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. The lawmaker also called out Democrats for, in their view, failing to get tough enough on China through actual trade legislation when they had the chance. And that's a legitimate critique. If tariffs are a valid trade policy tools, and most economists and politicians, both parties, have at some point said yes, they are, then why didn't Democrats push harder for formal congressional trade legislation targeting Chinese unfair trade practices when they controlled Congress? That's a real question that deserves a real answer. If the tariffs are struck down and actually come off, and that's a big if because legal battles can drag on, imported goods could get cheaper. Electronics, clothing, cars, machinery, raw materials. But there's a catch. Supply chains don't adjust overnight. Businesses that already shifted production, raised prices, or signed new contracts. They don't just flip a switch. Price relief, if it comes, will be gradual. Here's the uncomfortable math. Those tariffs were bringing in, remember, $124 billion a year. That's revenue the government was counting on. If those tariffs disappear, that's a $124 billion hole. Either spending gets cut, other taxes go up, or the deficit grows. There is no magic option where that just goes away. Anyone who tells you otherwise is not being straight with you. The tariffs were also leverage. Trump was using them to pressure countries, China, Canada, Mexico, the EU, to renegotiate trade terms, reduce their own barriers, make concessions on other issues. With that leverage gone or legally challenged, the U.S. position in those negotiations weakens. Other countries know we can't as easily threaten them with tariffs without an act of Congress. That changes the game. And this might actually be the most important long-term impact. The court essentially just said, Congress, if you want tariffs, you pass them. You own it. That's a massive shift. Now, both parties have to go on record. No more hiding behind executive power. You want tariffs on China? Vote for them. You want free trade? Vote for that. Every single member of Congress has to take a public position. That is how democracy is supposed to work. And honestly, that might be the healthiest outcome here. You think Donald Trump is just going to accept this quietly? Let's think about his options, because he has several and none of them are nothing. Option 1, push Congress. The administration could push the Republican-controlled Congress to pass legislation explicitly authorizing tariffs. Trump already has a slim majority in both chambers, and his party has shown willingness to move on trade. If they pass a law giving him explicit tariff authority, the court's objection goes away. Option 2, use other legal authorities. IEPA wasn't the only tool. There's Section 232 of the Trade Expansion Act, national security tariffs. There's Section 301 of the Trade Act, unfair trade practices. There's Section 201, safeguard tariffs. These have different legal bases. The court ruled on IEPA specifically. The administration could pivot to these other authorities, some of which have clearer statutory bases for tariffs. Option 3, negotiate deals that make the tariffs unnecessary. If countries are worried about tariffs coming back legislatively, they might come to the table faster to make trade concessions. The threat of potential future tariffs, even if current ones are blocked, still has diplomatic value. Option 4, and this is the most aggressive mode, challenge the ruling's scope. legal battles don't end at one ruling. Depending on how broadly the court wrote its opinion, there may be wiggle room on which tariffs it actually applies to, which countries, which products. Expect armies of government lawyers to look for every possible crack in this decision. Bottom line, this ruling is huge, but it is not the end of the tariff wars. It's a new chapter. Here's what I want you to take away from this ruling beyond the tariff debate. This is fundamentally a story about the limits of executive power in America, and it's a story both parties need to reckon with honestly. Over the last several decades, under presidents of both parties, the executive branch has been gradually accumulating more and more power. Presidents have used emergency declarations, executive orders, and broad interpretations of existing laws to do things that probably should have required congressional action. We saw it with Obama on immigration. We saw it with Biden on student loans, which the court also struck down. Now we're seeing it with Trump on tariffs. The Supreme Court, in multiple recent rulings, has been pushing back on this trend. They've invoked the major questions doctrine, the idea that when the executive branch wants to take a major action with enormous economic or political significance, Congress needs to have clearly authorized it. Regulate doesn't mean tax. Forgive doesn't mean cancel student debt. Emergency powers don't mean do whatever you want. If you believe in checks and balances, regardless of which party you support, this ruling should give you some level of satisfaction. The system is working. The court is drawing lines. The question now is whether Congress, of either party, has the political courage to actually legislate instead of outsourcing hard decisions to whoever sits in the Oval Office. So here's where I land on all of this. The Supreme Court ruled the Constitution matters. Congress is supposed to be the body that taxes you and me, not a single president acting alone under a vague emergency power. If you believe in separation of powers, today's ruling is a good day, regardless of how you feel about tariffs themselves. But the political theater? The Democrats doing victory laps when their own party maintained Trump's first-term China tariffs for 4 years and never passed comprehensive trade reform when they had the chance? That deserves scrutiny too. Real accountability goes in every direction. The trade war is far from over. Trump has other tools. Congress now has a decision to make, and American businesses and families will be watching every move. This story is developing, and we are going to be all over it. Now I want to hear from you. Are you team the court made the right call? Or do you think Congress should immediately pass legislation giving Trump his tariff power back? Drop it in the comments. Court was right, or Congress. Give it back. Let's see where this audience stands. If this video gave you real information, not just hot takes, not just party lines, show it some love. Like it, share it, subscribe if you haven't already. We do this every day. Complex stories, straight talk, no fluff. I'll see you in the next one.